My mother whispered at dinner, "You're the mistake we regret." Silence followed. I exposed the family secret via anonymous mail, unraveling their perfect facade. I, 32M, never thought a single sentence could shatter 20 years of carefully maintained illusions. But my mother proved me wrong on a Tuesday evening in March. The dining room was suffocating that night. Crystal chandeliers cast their usual warm glow over the mahogany table, but the light felt cold. My parents sat at opposite ends like monarchs presiding over their kingdom, my younger brother to my left, his wife beside him, and my sister across from me with her fiancé. The perfect family tableau. Everyone dressed impeccably, conversations flowing about stock portfolios and vacation homes. The usual performances we all delivered. I had become invisible somewhere along the way. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. My software engineering career didn't glitter like my brother's hedge fund position. My modest apartment downtown couldn't compete with my sister's penthouse. I had stopped trying to impress them years ago, but I still showed up to these dinners out of some misguided sense of obligation. My mother was discussing the upcoming charity gala she was organizing when I made the mistake of mentioning that I wouldn't be able to attend due to a work deadline. The table went quiet. Not the comfortable silence of contemplation, but the loaded quiet before a storm. She turned to me with that smile she reserved for servants and disappointments, leaned slightly in my direction, and spoke just loud enough for me to hear. She told me I was the mistake they regretted. The words came out like a whisper, casual as discussing the weather, but they landed like bullets. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. Everyone else continued eating, either not hearing or pretending not to hear. My brother's knife scraped against his plate. My sister reached for her wine glass. My father never looked up from cutting his steak. The conversation resumed around me as if nothing had happened, as if my mother hadn't just distilled 32 years of subtle rejection into one devastating sentence. I finished my meal mechanically, smiled when appropriate, laughed at my brother's joke about his latest acquisition, kissed my mother's cheek when I left, feeling her stiffen slightly at the contact. The entire drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. But instead of crumbling, something else happened. Something cold and calculated began forming in my chest. Because my mother's whispered contempt had finally broken through the last barrier of loyalty I'd been clinging to. And without that barrier, I could finally see everything clearly. I could see the family secret we'd all been protecting for decades. The apartment felt too quiet when I got home. I poured myself a drink I didn't really want and sat in the dark, thinking about my grandmother. She had died 3 years ago, leaving behind a safety deposit box that somehow ended up in my possession. My uncle, my mother's brother, had given me the key before he passed last year, telling me there were things I should know when the time was right. I had opened it once, read enough to understand the magnitude of what was inside, then locked it away. The truth had seemed too explosive, too destructive. I had told myself I was being the bigger person by keeping it buried, but the bigger person had just been called a mistake. I retrieved the box from my closet that night. Inside were letters, photographs, legal documents, and a journal written in my grandmother's careful handwriting. The story they told was simple and devastating. My father, the pillar of society, the respected businessman, the devoted family man, had built his empire on a foundation of fraud and stolen ideas. 28 years ago, he had been business partners with a man who had developed a revolutionary software algorithm. My father had stolen it, filed the patents under his own name, and pushed his partner out of the company they had founded together. The partner had tried to fight back, but my father had connections, money, and lawyers. He buried the man in litigation until he couldn't afford to continue. The partner lost everything. His marriage fell apart. He died in poverty 7 years later. The partner had a son. That son was now a janitor at one of my father's office buildings, working under a different name, completely unaware that the man whose floors he mopped had destroyed his father's life. My grandmother had known everything. She had documented it all, horrified by what her son-in-law had become, but unwilling to destroy her daughter's marriage and social standing by going public. Instead, she had preserved the evidence, hoping someone would eventually do the right thing. The journal entries were painful to read. My grandmother had loved me in a way my parents never had. She wrote about watching me grow up in a family that treated me like an afterthought, about her guilt for staying silent, about her hope that I would be different from them. I spent the next 2 weeks planning. Not in anger, though anger was there, burning steadily beneath everything else. But this required precision, not rage. My parents had built their lives on image, on the appearance of perfection, on the respect of their social circle. That was where they were vulnerable. The charity gala was perfect. 500 of the city's most influential people would be there. My mother would be center stage, basking in admiration. My father would be networking, cementing deals, playing the magnanimous philanthropist. My siblings would be orbiting them like planets around twin suns, reflecting their borrowed glory. I started with the partner's son. Finding him wasn't difficult. I arranged to run into him at a coffee shop near the building where he worked. We talked. I asked about his father without revealing why I was interested. He told me about a brilliant man who had been broken by betrayal, who had died believing his life's work had been stolen, but unable to prove it. The son had been 12 when everything fell apart. He was 40 now, still carrying the weight of his father's failure. I didn't tell him who I was. Not yet. But I made copies of everything in the safety deposit box and left them in an envelope at his apartment with a note explaining what the documents proved and suggesting he might want to contact a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property theft. I included information about the statute of limitations and how certain types of fraud could still be prosecuted. Then I prepared the anonymous mailings. I spent hours at different print shops across the city, using cash, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses like some kind of amateur spy. I compiled the most damaging documents into packages. Not everything, just enough to tell the story clearly. Copies of the original algorithm designs in the partner's handwriting. Email exchanges between my father and his lawyers discussing how to bury the litigation. Financial records showing the exact moment my father's company had exploded in value after the patent was filed. My grandmother's journal entries, redacted to protect her identity, but clear enough to establish provenance. I made a list of recipients. Every major donor to my mother's charity. Every business partner my father worked with. Every member of their country club. The boards they sat on. The organizations they led. The newspapers that had spent years writing puff pieces about their philanthropy and business acumen. The packages went out 5 days before the gala. I timed it perfectly. They would arrive, be opened, start circulating through social networks. Whispers would begin. Questions would be asked. But the full explosion wouldn't hit until the gala itself, when everyone in their circle would be in one room, all aware of the allegations, all watching my parents for their reactions. I also sent a package to the district attorney's office with a note suggesting they might want to investigate, and one to the patent office documenting the fraud, and one to the business school where my father frequently gave lectures on entrepreneurship and ethics. The anonymous email account I'd created sent out links to a private website I'd built, hosted overseas, containing every single document in searchable format. I sent the link to journalists, bloggers, business ethics watchdogs, and activists who focused on corporate fraud. Then I waited. Update 1. The first sign that the packages had landed came 3 days before the gala. My father's assistant called asking if I knew anything about documents that were being circulated. She sounded nervous. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. My phone rang 4 more times that day. I ignored all the calls. My brother showed up at my apartment that evening. He looked shaken in a way I'd never seen before. He wanted to know if I had received anything strange in the mail. He said people were talking, that there were accusations being made about Dad, that the whole thing was clearly fabricated by business rivals, but it was creating problems. He asked if I would make a statement defending the family. I told him I'd been busy with work and hadn't been following any drama. I asked what the accusations were. He gave me a sanitized version, downplaying everything, calling it a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I nodded along and said of course I'd support Dad. That family came first, all the things he wanted to hear. He left looking relieved. I felt nothing watching him go. The next day my sister called. She was more direct. She told me the gala might be canceled, that this was a disaster, that Mom was having a breakdown. She said I needed to come to the house for an emergency family meeting. I told her I had a work commitment I couldn't break. She called me selfish. I agreed and hung up. The local business journal published a carefully worded article that evening. They didn't make direct accusations, but they laid out the timeline of my father's company's founding and noted that questions had been raised about the origin of its core intellectual property. They quoted anonymous sources suggesting that documentation had emerged, casting doubt on the official narrative. The article was cautious, hedged with legal disclaimers, but it was enough to make the story real. My phone exploded. Texts from extended family members, old family friends, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know what was happening, if I'd heard the rumors, what the family was saying. I responded to none of them. 2 days before the gala, my mother called. She didn't ask me to come over or meet her somewhere. She simply demanded I tell her if I was behind this. Her voice was ice. I asked her what she was talking about. She said she knew it was me, that I'd always been resentful, that this was my revenge for not living up to the family standards. I let the silence stretch out between us before telling her I had no idea why she would think I'd do something like this. I reminded her that I was just a mistake they regretted, so surely I wouldn't have the intelligence or motivation to orchestrate anything so complex. Then I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. The partner's son contacted a lawyer. I know this because the lawyer issued a public statement announcing they were representing him in a civil suit against my father and his company for intellectual property theft, fraud, and unjust enrichment. The lawyer sounded hungry. High-profile cases like this could make careers. The district attorney's office issued a statement saying they were reviewing materials that had been submitted to them regarding potential criminal fraud. They wouldn't confirm or deny an investigation, but the statement was enough. My father's company's stock price began to drop. The day before the gala, my mother held a press conference from our family's lawyer's office. She announced that the charity event would proceed as planned, that the accusations against her husband were baseless attacks from envious competitors, and that the family looked forward to being vindicated. She looked perfect on camera, composed and dignified, every inch the wronged matriarch. I watched the press conference from my office, eating takeout noodles, and felt absolutely nothing. Update 2. The gala was a masterpiece of social awkwardness. I know this because I attended. I hadn't planned to go initially, but something made me change my mind. Maybe I wanted to see the culmination of my work. Maybe I needed to look them in the eyes one more time. Maybe I just wanted to watch it all burn. I arrived exactly on time, dressed in the expensive suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The venue was decorated spectacularly as always. All ice sculptures, and string quartets, and champagne towers. But the atmosphere was poisoned. People stood in tight clusters, conversations stopping abruptly when anyone new approached. The glances toward my parents were sharp, evaluating, hungry for signs of guilt or weakness. My mother saw me first. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, fury, suspicion, then settling into a rigid mask of civility. She was surrounded by her core group of society friends, all of whom were clearly performing loyalty while probably secretly believing every word of the accusations. I nodded to her politely. She turned away. My father was holding court near the bar, projecting confidence, shaking hands firmly, laughing too loudly at jokes. But his eyes were dead. He saw me, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. I made my rounds. Chatted with people who had ignored me at these events for years, but who suddenly found me fascinating. They asked leading questions, fishing for information, trying to figure out where I stood. I gave them nothing, just smiled blandly and commented on the ice sculptures. My brother cornered me near the silent auction tables. He looked exhausted. He said he knew it was me, that there was no one else who could have had access to whatever documents had been sent out, that I destroyed the family for what, some imagined slight? Some childhood resentment? I asked him if he remembered the dinner 3 weeks ago. He looked confused. I reminded him of the meal where our mother had called me a mistake. He said he didn't remember that she would never say something like that I was probably being oversensitive. I nodded slowly and told him that was exactly the problem. Then I walked away. The evening's main event was supposed to be my mother's speech about the charity and its accomplishments. She took the stage looking regal, microphone in hand, 500 people watching. She started strong, talking about the children the charity had helped, the programs they'd funded, the difference they'd made in the community. Then someone's phone buzzed. Then another. Then a dozen more. People were checking their screens, faces changing as they read whatever was being sent around. The whispers started. One of the investigative journalists I'd contacted had published a comprehensive expose. They'd taken all the documents from my website and built them into a devastating narrative, complete with testimony from people who had worked with my father and his partner in the early days. The article had dropped at exactly 8:30, time to interrupt the gala at its peak. My mother powered through her speech, but she'd lost the room. People were reading, scrolling, showing their phones to their neighbors. By the time she finished, the applause was scattered and brief. I left before dessert was served. Update 3. The next 6 months were a slow-motion avalanche. The civil lawsuit moved forward. The partner's son had a compelling case and multiple law firms wanted a piece of it. My father's lawyers tried every tactic to dismiss it, but the documentation was too solid. Discovery revealed even more evidence of fraud, including emails my grandmother hadn't had access to. The case became a news cycle staple. The district attorney did open a criminal investigation. Fraud charges were filed. My father surrendered himself for booking, was released on bail, and immediately stopped appearing in public. His company removed him from the board. His name came off the building. His partners distanced themselves with carefully worded statements. My mother's charity lost 3/4 of its donors within 2 months. Several board members resigned. She tried to maintain her position, but eventually she was forced out. The organization rebranded completely, removing all association with our family name. My siblings closed ranks around our parents. My brother called me repeatedly at first, demanding I come forward and admit what I'd done, threatening legal action, threatening to cut me off from the family. I reminded him I'd already been cut off, that I'd been a mistake they regretted, that I was simply living down to their expectations. He eventually stopped calling. My sister sent a single text message telling me I was dead to her. I didn't respond. The family home went on the market. Not enough to cover legal fees and likely settlements, but enough to delay the inevitable. My parents moved to a condo in a less prestigious neighborhood. My mother stopped appearing at society events. My father's trial date was set for the following spring. The partner's son reached out to me 4 months after everything started. He'd figured out who had sent him the documents. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd first talked. He didn't thank me exactly, but he told me that knowing the truth about what had happened to his father had lifted a weight he'd been carrying his entire adult life. He said his father would have been glad someone finally did something. I asked if he felt better now that justice was being served. He said justice was complicated, that no amount of money or vindication would bring his father back, but at least the record would be set straight. Then he asked why I'd done it. I told him about the dinner, about the whispered sentence that had broken something fundamental inside me, about realizing that protecting people who saw you as a mistake was its own form of self-destruction, about deciding that some secrets were too toxic to keep buried. He nodded slowly and said that made sense. Then he shook my hand and left. I still work the same job, still live in the same apartment. My life hasn't changed externally, but something inside has shifted. I don't feel guilty. I thought I might, but I don't. I've been waiting for regret to show up, for some moment of remorse where I realize I went too far, but it hasn't happened. My grandmother's journal had a passage I keep thinking about. She wrote that silence in the face of wrongdoing makes you complicit, but that speaking up requires courage she'd never been able to find. She wrote that she hoped I'd be braver than she was. I don't know if what I did was brave. Revenge usually isn't. But it was honest in a way my family had never been. I exposed the rot at the center of their perfect facade, and the structure collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Sometimes late at night, I wonder what would have happened if my mother hadn't said those words at dinner. If she'd just stayed silent, if the evening had passed like all the others before it, would I have kept their secret? Would I have let the lie continue? I think I would have. That's the uncomfortable truth. I would have protected them out of habit, out of obligation, out of the desperate hope that eventually they might see me as something other than a disappointment. But she did say those words. She called me a mistake to my face while the rest of the family pretended not to hear. And in doing so, she freed me from the last threads of loyalty holding me back. The irony is that I'm probably the best thing that ever happened to that family. I'm the only one who was honest. I'm the only one who did the right thing, even if I did it for the wrong reasons. My father will likely go to prison. My mother's social standing is destroyed. My siblings will spend years rebuilding their own reputations. The family name is permanently tarnished. And I'm fine with that, because I'm not the mistake they regret anymore. I'm the reckoning they ignored until it was too late. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.